They didn't see a veteran. They saw an old black man in a cap they didn't recognize, and decided he didn't belong. Not in that bank. Not even in the uniform he once wore. His name was Robert Keane. People who knew him before the silence called him Bobby. He wasn't looking for trouble. Wasn't there to flash rank or relive war stories. He came to Summit Ridge National Bank to withdraw a little money, an account left untouched for years. That money came from the kind of work no one talks about. Operations off the record. Danger pay deposited under numbers, not names. He stepped through the doors at 9:01 a.m. Shirt pressed, jacket faded but neat. Black cap in his hand, gold thread reading, Korea, Vietnam veteran. He'd cleaned that cap with a toothbrush that morning, wore it like a flag. In his coat pocket were 2 discharge slips. Decades old, still folded like sacred paper. A VA card, and a worn brass coin. He kept them close. Some things you don't leave behind. He waited his turn, quiet as ever. No tapping feet, no shifting weight. Just patience. The kind taught in foxholes and field hospitals. When his number came, he approached the teller. Young, distracted, barely glancing at him. "I'm here to access an old account," he said, voice even. "Robert Keane." She blinked at the screen. Then at him. Something didn't compute. He handed her his ID. His hand shook slightly. Not from nerves, but from years of doing things most men couldn't survive. She paused. Said nothing. Then flagged her manager. Caden. Slick haircut. Crooked tie. Smile like it came with sarcasm preloaded. He walked over slowly. Looked at Bobby. Then his paperwork. "You sure this is your account, sir?" he asked. The word "sir" rolled off his tongue like it didn't belong to Bobby. Caden picked up one of the discharge slips, held it up like it might stain him. "This looks ancient," he said, half laughing. "Typed on a typewriter, maybe?" The teller snorted, unsure if she should laugh. Bobby didn't react. He reached into his coat and pulled something from the inside pocket. Placed it on the counter. Not tossed, not shown. Just placed. A challenge coin. Brass, worn smooth. Engraved with a thunderbird and 7 stars. Anyone who'd been through real hell would know it. But Caden didn't look. He pushed it aside with 2 fingers. "Cute," he said. "Bet you can find these on Etsy now." The coin spun once. Stopped. Bobby didn't pick it up. Didn't say a word. He just stood there. Still. Because everything that needed to be said had already happened. In the way they didn't see him. And in the way he refused to disappear. Caden turned to the security desk and motioned with his chin. "Looks like we've got another fake vet trying to pull a fast one," he said. "Go ahead. Walk him out." The guard hesitated. Just for a second. But that second was enough. Enough for Bobby to hear it. Enough for the rest of the room to catch on. 2 customers near the wall stifled laughter behind their phones. One lowered his voice and whispered something to the person beside him. Another stared forward, pretending to read his screen. Bobby didn't protest. Didn't argue. Didn't point to the patch or explain the coin. He picked up the brass disc with steady fingers, slid it back into his jacket, and gave a single nod. Then turned. And walked, slowly, deliberately, to a bench near the tall glass windows. He sat down, spine straight, hands resting on his lap. His eyes didn't scan the room. They focused on nothing in particular. The laughter faded. A chill passed through the lobby. Not shame, not yet, but something quieter. Discomfort. Like the crowd wasn't entirely sure anymore. Like maybe they'd just watched something wrong happen, but couldn't put a name to it. One person, however, didn't laugh. Maya Rodriguez, early 30s, ex-Air Force. She'd worked supply logistics across 3 continents, now in private defense. And she'd seen that coin before. Once, when a retired JSOC colonel came to brief her unit. She remembered what happened when he placed it on the table. Every officer in the room stood. Maya stepped toward the counter, her voice calm but sharp. "You just made a mistake," she said, locking eyes with Caden. He blinked. "Excuse me." She pointed toward the bench by the window. "That man? That's not some phony. That coin outranks every direct deposit this building's ever processed. Caden scoffed. If he's that important, where's his entourage? Maya didn't respond. She turned and walked outside, pulled out her phone, and placed a call. But someone else had noticed too. In a back room, half hidden from the public side of the bank, sat a man in his 60s. Quiet. Sharp. No title on the door, but everyone knew he ran the place more than any manager. He'd heard the name. Robert Keane. His eyes narrowed. He rose slowly, walked toward the far wall. There, behind a piece of glass, hung an old dedication plaque, tarnished at the edges. It listed the original military contributors to Summit Ridge Command Base, back before the land was privatized. Midway down the list, one name was engraved in brass: R.J. Keane, the officer who oversaw the facility's construction before it ever became a civilian institution. The man now sitting outside, accused of fraud in the very space he helped build. The banker didn't panic. He didn't say a word. He picked up a rotary dial phone reserved for legacy calls, dialed a 7-digit code only a few ever used, and said 6 words. "It's Bishop Coyne, Summit Ridge. He's here." Then hung up. Outside, Bobby hadn't moved. He didn't look at his phone, didn't shift in his seat, didn't react to the call or the whispers behind the glass. He just watched the flag out front twitch gently in the wind, the same wind that had once ripped through his field tent half a world away. He didn't leave. He crossed the street and sat beneath a faded awning, coat buttoned, cap tilted forward, not waiting for an apology, not hoping for justice, but because men like him have always known how to wait. They wait in lines that don't move. They wait for systems that forget them. They wait, even when the world laughs in their face. What no one in that bank realized, not the smug manager, not the wide-eyed teller, not even Maya, was that 30 minutes from now, silence would replace every chuckle. Because just 5 miles away, a general had already tossed his phone across his office, pulled his dress uniform from the hanger, and stormed toward the exit, intent on making sure the man they humiliated would never be invisible again. Back inside Summit Ridge National, time dragged. 20 minutes passed like wet concrete, slow, thick, heavy in the air. The teller who'd laughed earlier now typed with stiff shoulders, eyes locked on her screen. Caden, the manager, moved in tight loops behind the counter, restless, glancing at the door too often for someone pretending nothing was wrong. He didn't know why, not yet, but something had shifted. And deep down, he felt it. Bobby Keane hadn't moved, not an inch. He sat exactly where he'd been told to go, as if this was just another waiting room, just another official desk in a life full of long lines and clipped instructions. His cane rested between his knees, hands folded gently across the handle, spine straight, shoulders firm, eyes calm. He didn't speak, didn't flinch, and that coin, the one they brushed off like a toy, stayed inside his coat pocket, its weight unnoticed by everyone who thought they understood value. But the silence around him had changed. It wasn't the silence of dismissal anymore. It was the kind that creeps in when certainty starts to crack. Maya Rodriguez stood by the lobby wall, arms crossed, brow furrowed. She'd already made the call, not to a friend, not to a lawyer. She'd reached out to Fort Brixton, a high-clearance contact from her former unit. She gave him 2 words, Bishop Coyne, and one name, Robert Keane. There was a pause, then a change in tone. "He's there now?" the voice asked. "Don't let him leave." Maya didn't know what was coming, but her gut said something had already been set in motion, and it had. 2 blocks away, a black SUV slid between traffic like a bullet. No sirens, just a single blue flash under the mirror. A silent warning, authority incoming. Behind the tinted windows sat Major General Everett Kaney, decorated, feared, calculated, head of 4 regional districts, one of only 5 men in uniform with bishop-level active recon clearance. When he heard the name Robert Keane, he stopped mid-sentence, closed the briefing binder, stood up from his chair, said only 4 words to his aide. "Cancel everything. He's waiting." "Aide!" the general snapped, grabbing his jacket. "Suit up! We're leaving!" Robert Keane wasn't just a name buried in a clearance file. To Major General Everett Kaney, he was the reason he wore command stars, A ghost. A man thought long gone. The kind whispered about in classified war rooms and legacy leadership briefings. Kaney had studied under operations Keane helped engineer. The very doctrine that built modern recon started with that man's maps. And now that man had been mocked, publicly, in a building that stood on ground he once commanded. It wasn't protocol, Kaney felt. It was fury. Back inside the bank, Bobby adjusted his sleeve. The soft hum of fluorescent lighting filled the stillness. No chatter, no phones. Just uneasy air. At the coffee station, a man abandoned his cup and slipped out. Near the entrance, the security guard shifted his weight, eyes flicking toward Bobby like he was trying to figure out whether to salute or avoid him. The old man hadn't said a word, hadn't raised a hand, hadn't even looked angry. And yet, he held the kind of presence that made uniforms sit straighter. Caden leaned behind the counter, whispering. "He's still sitting there?" he scoffed. "Seriously?" One of the newer tellers nodded silently. Caden chuckled, shaking his head. "Probably hoping to go viral. Let someone post a video, collect a few donations. Happens all the time with these old vets." Maya didn't move, but her jaw tensed. Even the teller beside Caden looked down, the moment too heavy to pretend away. Still, Caden smirked. "Should have called the cops earlier," he muttered. "Watch, he'll fake a faint or something to cause a scene." But before his voice could carry further, the front doors slammed open. Not a push, not a breeze, but a strike. The kind of entry that shifts the air. Boots, real, regulation, polished, landed hard on the tile. Not hurried, not slow, just exact. In walked Major General Everett Keane, full dress, medals blazing, uniform flawless, each movement precise, each step a statement. Behind him, an aide followed, leather case in one hand, eyes forward, no sound. Every head turned. Conversations died. Coffee stopped mid-pour. Phones were slowly lowered. Even the printers seemed to freeze. Caden looked up, mid-laugh, and went still. His grin vanished like it had been erased. Kaney didn't glance left, didn't nod, didn't speak. His eyes went directly to the corner, to the bench by the window, to the man who sat upright, cane between his knees, hat beside him. The man they'd pushed aside, the man they didn't recognize, the man who had taught Kaney's generation how to survive war. General Kaney stepped forward, stopped precisely 10 feet from the bench, and brought his hand up in a sharp, commanding salute. The sound of palm striking brow echoed across the lobby. A single clean crack that broke through the silence harder than any apology ever could. Bobby looked up, startled. For just a second, confusion flickered in his eyes. Then he rose slowly, steady hands on his cane, and returned the salute. Not like it was a habit, like it had never left him. Across the lobby, no one moved. Kaney lowered his hand, then turned to face the room with a cold scan that felt like judgment itself. His voice, when it came, was measured, low, but honed to cut through steel. "Who," he asked, "accused Colonel Robert Keane of being a fraud?" The title landed like a hammer. Not shouted, carved. No one answered, not immediately. Kaney took a step forward. "Colonel Keane," he said again, emphasizing each syllable, "was key in crafting joint reconnaissance protocols still in use by free nations today. His service record spans 2 declared wars, 6 operational theaters, and over a dozen missions that still remain redacted." He paused. Yet someone here doubted his name. Every set of eyes shifted. Caden, standing near the teller window, went pale. I didn't know," he stammered. "His paperwork was... it looked old." "Of course it's old," Kaney snapped, "because he's lived long enough to earn it." The general didn't shout. He didn't need to. This man led coordinated deployments while you were figuring out how to connect your phone to Wi-Fi. The silence turned, from discomfort to guilt. Kaney's aide stepped forward, opened a locked case, and laid it flat on the counter. Inside, a heavy folder stamped classified, a commemorative coin nestled in velvet, and a printed scan of the brass plaque on the bank wall, the one with Robert Keane's name carved in bold. Kaney placed the folder gently on the marble. "This building exists," he said, "because of his tactical infrastructure." "That flagged account? It once financed the original supply network your branch now profits from." Then he turned back to Bobby. His tone softened. "Sir," he said quietly, "if I'd known you were here sooner." Bobby gave a small, tired smile. "I wasn't here to be found," he said. "Just needed enough to help my grandson start school." Kaney nodded. "Then we'll see to it." Together, the two men stepped toward the counter. No escort, no parade, just presence. Caden stepped aside without a word, his hands up slightly, eyes low. The room wasn't silent anymore out of awkwardness. It had become reverent, as if the very ground remembered whose footsteps it once carried. People watched, unsure whether to speak or just absorb what they had seen. No one laughed. No one blinked. Bobby Keane withdrew his funds quietly. No one asked for details. No one needed to. Because in that moment, it was clear. This man didn't come for recognition. But he damn well earned it. He didn't say anything to the teller. Just accepted the printed receipt with a quiet nod, folded it once, and tucked it into his inner pocket with the same care he might have given to a field order. The young woman behind the glass whispered a soft apology. Voice thin, eyes avoiding his. Bobby didn't acknowledge it. Not because he was bitter. Because there was nothing left to say. He hadn't come for apologies. He came to keep a promise. He turned to leave, adjusting his coat. But before he reached the exit, General Kaney stepped forward and placed a steady hand on his shoulder. "Colonel," he said, "you've got 5 minutes." Bobby raised a brow. 5 minutes for what? Kaney's eyes swept the lobby. "For something you never asked for." He didn't shout. He didn't motion. But something in the silence shifted. A young man in uniform near the ATM stood and saluted. An older woman in a Veterans Affairs jacket followed. Then a middle-aged man, former Navy from the look of his wrist tattoo, rose beside the loan desk and stood straight. One by one, without instruction, people stood. Civilians too. Bankers, clerks, customers. No ceremony. No music. Just stillness. And respect. This is how you honor someone who never demanded to be honored. Bobby stood there frozen. Not because he was moved by pride, but because it had been so long since anyone had looked at him and truly seen him. Then finally, he raised his hand in return. Not with performance, but with precision. The kind that never fades from the body, even when the world tries to forget what it once demanded from you. Kaney reached into his jacket and pulled out a small velvet case. He held it out with both hands. "We've had this waiting a long time," he said. "Didn't know when you'd be ready to take it." Inside, a medal, unlabeled by branch, no gold filigree, just a clean metal disc, polished smooth, engraved only with Robert J. Keane, service beyond record. Bobby held it in his palm. Not like a trophy, more like a relic returned home. He stared at it. Long, quiet. Then closed the case gently. No words, no tears. Just a nod. A door inside him, long shut, long locked, quietly opened, and closed again. He looked at Kaney, voice soft. "I didn't come here to be remembered," he said. "I just came to help my grandson, that's it." Kaney didn't argue. "And in doing that," he replied, "you reminded every person in this room what service actually means." Bobby walked out into the sunlight. No cameras followed, no journalists, no hashtags. Just one man, walking out the same way he walked in, quiet, upright, and finished. Inside, nobody spoke for a long moment. They didn't go back to their phones. They didn't rush back into lines. They just paused. Something had changed in that room. Not because a general showed up, not because someone saluted, but because they had nearly missed it. And now they couldn't unsee it. 2 days later, a new line appeared on the brass plaque near the main entrance of Summit Ridge National Bank. It wasn't announced. No ribbon was cut. No post went viral. But beneath the old dedication, a second inscription was engraved. Colonel Robert J. Keane, U.S. Army Honor in Silence. It didn't list the incident, didn't mention who saluted him, didn't describe what had happened, but everyone who had been there knew. Some truths don't need headlines, they need room, they need stillness. And now, every time a customer walks into that bank, whether to deposit a check, request a loan, or sign for a mortgage, they walk beneath the name of a man they almost erased, but never will again.